Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So, Yorck von Korff, I'm practitioner. I'm talking from a practitioner perspective. I'm also based at Montpellier, like Deborah, and I've been working mostly in Europe. So, the pictures that I've put there are some of the species that I've worked with, but I've also worked in water management, including groundwater management, urban planning, and sometimes I just work with teams that have conflicts and try to help them without any animal species in there. And what I wanted to talk about is pretty much my own learning frontier, because I start to believe that helping social systems to better understand themselves could be a key to letting them move forward together. And I will try to explain what I mean with that, but I'm not sure if I already fully understand this myself. So it's in this realm of ecological mediation and conflicts, which is a special challenge because, of course, you get specific stakeholder groups there. So I'm trying to explore this idea and what difference it could make, and also how it could be done. And I specifically want to go into two approaches which I find interesting, and some of you might know them, and at least one person is in a room that has been involved in one of them. So that's systemic constellations. Some of you might know family constellations, but that's used on families. So what I'm trying to explore is if this approach can also be used in these kind of areas of environmental mediation. And the other one is deep democracy, as has been suggested by Arnold Mindell and Werner Lewis. So that seems to be also, it's a bit of a different approach, but it seems to be also quite worthwhile, and I'm trying to integrate some of these things into my work. And I would be very happy if there are other people who are working on the same kind of frontiers, if they come up afterwards and would like to share about their experiences. I think that it could be very useful to go forward. So what does it mean that social systems become knowledgeable about themselves? And some of the things that connect us, they connect us very deeply, and we don't necessarily always have the words for these kind of deep connections. And just to give you a taste, I would like to play this trailer, and I am not exactly sure of how I can do that. Do we have a... Thank you very much for trying this. So this is a new movie that's just coming out, the Geographies of Solitude. A colleague shared this with me, and I thought, okay, I can put this into my talk, because it's somehow connecting to this theme. Is there something deeper that is running through all of us, including the animal world and including the other parts of nature that we all share? Carl Rogers, the American psychologist, said there is. So he called this a constructive force, which is running through all of us and in which we can tap. And he saw it everywhere in nature, in the small snowflakes or in the spiraling galaxies. So if this is there, it could be a force that we can work with. But the question is, how do we talk about this and how do we integrate it into our work? So then I used DALL-E 2, so that's a bit different, to create this image. I wanted to actually have a social system, socio-ecological system to sit on the couch. I mean, in a way, so this is about explaining what does it mean that social systems better understand themselves. And it's like, you know as a person about personal development, and personal development basically, at least to me, means that you gain a new perspective on life. You see things differently in ways that you didn't see them before. And that enables you to do more things. For example, if you see what is a typical development stage which we go through, that we are all not connected to each other and that we are all separate entities, then there are certain things that are not possible for you because you see things in this way. And if you think that we are all connected somehow, then other things become possible and then you will address people differently. And so this same thing that can also happen to social systems, but then those social systems have to become aware of themselves. So this can be about not knowing what are the different elements of the systems, what are the roles, what are the processes, what are the needs here, what are the forces that are deeply there. Oh wow, time flies. And what are the relationships right now? And what will be the consequences if we don't take action? So we are talking about this realm here, this realm. In all places, this is Oxford. I mean, that's usually a place where you talk about this, so everything that you can measure. But when we are in environmental conflict, we also need this realm, the non-consensus reality. And this is just about different perceptions of time, that time you can measure, and the time that is different when you spend time with a beloved person, and then when you behold a beautiful sunset, time might stop altogether, and all the three are reality. So I have been experimenting with systemic constellations. Maybe go one forward. So just to give you an image of a systemic constellation, it looks like this. This was 3 weeks ago with a group of researchers in France, with people from CIRAD and other people. And what happens there is something quite unusual. We call it representative perception. There is a case bringer, and he has a specific situation. Let's say, for example, a case that he's working on in Brazil between soja growers and other people who want to protect the Amazon. And so you have different system elements. And he will select among the room who could represent, for example, the soja industry, the small farmer holders, the representatives of the small farmer holder, but also the researcher who intervenes. And then he will go and put the elements in the room. So it's pretty much like the modeling that we saw before, except that something unusual happens here. People experience specific sensations when they are in this position, when they are placed. And that's the representative perception. So they can speak as if they were the element. And that's something that we don't understand why it happens, but it does happen every time. So it gives us an avenue to exploring the different feelings, the different needs of system elements on a deep level, and we can work with that. But the challenge is, how can we integrate this into the real stakeholder groups? Because not everybody might be open to working in this way. And I've been working with people in this way. I have been working with groups, but they were not stakeholders in the environmental realm. They were other stakeholders which were more open to these kind of processes. This is just a representation. You can do this online too. I have 1 minute left. So just very briefly, so this is Arnold Mendel and Myrna Lewis. I've been using some of their approaches in actual mediation work. Some weeks ago, we had a clash between mountain guides and some nature zone protection people, and I thought, and so that's also of course important, what the facilitator feels, what could be the appropriate process in the morning, that in a moment, that a process from Myrna Lewis called the argument might be very appropriate. And what was interesting in this approach is that, that's what you also said, Brian, before, the conflict is not a problem, and in this approach you just go into the conflict and you let it play it out, and you give people a chance to really clash, but they don't argue against each other, they argue against roles. So they know that the other just has a role, they can say everything, it's called send all your arrows, throw all your arrows, shoot all your arrows, and then afterwards when they have shot all the arrows, they just try to find the golden nuggets in what they heard. And with this, I have finished.
As long as you don't have any arrows, we're good. Questions?
I am freaked out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Just have to speak a little louder.
I shall. I think these alternative approaches could be very powerful. Seeing that many in conservation and both on the scientific side as well as the application side come from an ecology background, they tend to be more reductionist in thinking and might be quite hesitant to take up some of these ideas that they might argue would be quite new agey. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, or how to start approaching it to try and test and trial if it really has power, which I think it may have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so thank you for the question. We did this training with the group from Sirat 2 or 3 weeks ago. There were about 17 people, and they were of course quite excited about the possibility to go into this, otherwise they wouldn't have signed up for this. And we also simulated the possibility that they go further with that. And so we also constellated some of the hierarchy. And I hope I can say that. What happened in the constellation, in the representatives, what they were saying, when they represented the hierarchy was, okay, why don't you just, because they were uncertain if they could really do that, so we simulated the possibility of doing this, of going further. And so in the constellation, the hierarchy was saying, yeah, why don't you go further? The other approaches don't work anyway. Mm-hmm. So there's also this kind of despair, which you can sometimes see. What on earth can we still use so that it doesn't all go down the drain? Don't we have to be courageous, even if we risk to pass for new ages and go further? It requires courage, but I think it also requires realism with the audiences that you're facing. I think it requires both.
Last question.
Thanks.
It is on to speak loudly.
Okay. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, I really like kind of the deep democracy elements, the systematic constellations. Have you, or actually any of the other presenters, used any meaningful connection or deep connection exercises as part of your stakeholder engagement? Because what we've seen in a lot of other conflict spaces, especially when you're dealing with issues related to, for example, immigration, those kind of deep connection, meaningful connection exercises really do help to get people connecting on a human-to-human level prior to even discussing emotive issues like conservation.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the challenges I'm also still struggling with is that the method that we are using has to fit into the very situation that you are in. So not all exercises might be appropriate at all moments. And I think that's also the idea, or one important idea of deep democracy, that we are aware of the processes which are in the room, and if they're in the room, they're also inside of ourselves, and that we can connect to what's in the room and inside of us and have a clue as a mediator, is this kind of thing appropriate now or not? And then it becomes part of the whole process. Might sound a bit obscure, but maybe it's...
Sure. Okay. One last question, and then we have like a few minutes for any sort of macro questions or things to make connections between them, between the different talks.
Thanks so much for the talk. This probably follows on from everything we've just said, but do you have much experience in applying this to different, like within different cultures? Because surely, like this sort of vulnerability and asking groups to be vulnerable in that way wouldn't be appropriate in certain cultures, and
Yes, I don't think that I would advocate that you should try this out regardless in all cultures. I know that Arnold Mindell has worked in all kinds of cultures and that it worked out quite well there, but that was Arnold Mindell. And with respect to constellations, the approach that I'm using is coming from some German practitioners that have put this forward. I find in France, where I do a lot of my work, it can be totally appropriate, in Europe probably, and if I go beyond that, I would have to see. Yeah, I think that's a word of caution that's always in order. Yeah, thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.